Africa.
Tech.
Innovation.
The future of business.
This is Inside the C-Suite, where we bring you real stories from business leaders across Africa, how they started and how they built their companies to be industry leaders. In this episode, we are privileged to host Wandia Gichuru, co-founder and CEO of Vivo Activewear. So Wandia, 13 is a magical number for you.
Ooh.
Starting from humble beginnings at Junction, and now, 13 outlets. Let's talk a little bit about that. How was that journey?
So 13 actually is today, because we just opened our store at Kiambu Mall this morning.
Yeah.
And it's a mall that's still being, occupied. Mm-hmm. And we made a few sales, so
congratulations.
It's always good luck. You don't want to open a new store and you don't make a single sale on that day. Our head of sales went and bought something and then said, "Oh, we made a sale. I bought." I'm like, "No, that doesn't count." We're going to have a real client needs to walk in and be convinced that there's something they like.
I mean, what made you think about Vivo? Your background is in, economics. You did an MBA. You worked, in fantastic companies, the World Bank, Citigroup. Why did you leave that?
I mean, I think there are a number of reasons. And, when a number of my friends, when they got to their early mid-40s, I think that's about the time that a lot of people at least women start to think, do I really want to continue to have to be employed and have to give so much of my time and my energy to an employer? And a lot of us had very good careers, but wanted something else, wanted more freedom, wanted more independence, wanted to be able to choose how to spend our time and our energy. And if you find yourself in a position that you're able to do that, and not everyone can, but if you're lucky enough, if you may have saved enough money, or you have a career that you can pivot and turn into something a bit more independent, what I noticed is a number of us made the same decision. Not everyone went into business, but a lot of people went into something that was a lot more independent. Including people in this room right now who are friends of mine who have made similar decisions. I think the difference was I then chose to go into something completely different. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that I just pivoted into consulting in an area that I'd been employed in, which was one option.
Yes.
That I could have done.
The safest option.
Well, yes and no. I mean, you still have to convince people to hire you and pay you.
Of course.
But I think for me, another thing was the last 10 years of being employed had meant traveling from country to country and moving. So every 2 to 3 years I had moved. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to stay put, and I wanted it to be here in Kenya. Mm-hmm. So when I first moved back, I wasn't clear what I wanted to do. I just knew that I didn't want to keep doing what I'd been doing. I wanted a change. Mm-hmm. And then I found myself, in the meantime, doing a lot of dance classes and enjoying that and thinking, oh, I need to buy, hip-hop sneakers or salsa shoes, and I couldn't find anything on the market. I was doing it with a close friend. Mm-hmm. And so we decided, we said, there's a gap, clearly, because we can't find what we're looking for. There must be others like us who are struggling. And we convinced ourselves that there was enough of a growing community who was interested in dance and fitness to warrant a business being set up. But very naive, not knowing how we were going to do it, where we would get the product, where would we sell it,
exactly.
What would we price it. I mean, a lot of that was very, very unclear at the time. And so, in retrospect, it's quite easy to build a story and say, well, this was all very deliberate. In fact, this morning I met with a guy who runs one of the world's largest brands office in Nairobi. So they're the company that owns Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger and companies like that. And he said, I went to visit one of your stores, and it's very clear that you have a very clear strategy there. You choose this fabric for a reason, and you do these designs for a reason. And I'm like, okay. Now 7 years later, it looks like that. But at the time, we started by trying to offer fitness clothing.
Yes.
And so then when we thought we might as well add on some clothes to complement that, we chose stretchy clothes because they looked a little bit closer to the fitness. But it wasn't because we realized that that would work for a particular target group or a particular client.
Exactly.
But once you have a product and you start to realize, well, who's buying it and why? Then these things start to add up. I mean, I think there are companies that start with a very clear vision, but I can't say we were one of those.
So what informed your ability to do pricing, in a way that would appeal to the Kenyan market, as well as that would meet the, the pocket demands that an average Kenyan would have?
I think one of the things that we were clear about right from the start was that we wanted to be accessible. And so we wanted to offer a brand that your average middle-class Kenyan woman would be able to afford.
Yes.
So for me, one of the tests has always been, can the people who work in the malls where we have shops come and buy in our shop?
Exactly.
And if they can't do that, then you're outpricing. And I'm not saying that they can come necessarily every week, but if somebody is earning 40, 50,000 shillings, they may choose occasionally to buy something for 3,000. Once you're priced at 7, 8, 10 and up, then that's a very different target group. So we priced first, and then we source based on knowing that we must work within this price point. So it's not the other way around.
Great, yeah. You understood the basket value of an average Kenyan and then worked backwards to meet the requirement from your sourcing. So talking about sourcing, where do you get your stuff? Or is it a secret?
When we started the company, we were importing everything, ready-made, finished product. And then about 2 years in, we decided to start manufacturing locally. And that was not because that had always been the plan, but it was because we were not able to find the range of sizes and colors and styles that we wanted to create. And when we tried finding other places to make it, we could not meet the minimum order quantities that we were being asked for. So we're like, okay, well, what else do we do? Let's just start, trying to do it ourselves. So about 50% of what you would find in a Vivo store is made in-house, in our own production facility that we have. Another maybe 20 to 30% is made in Kenya, but not inside our building. So we've started working with some other small factories that will make for us. And then we still bring in about 30% ready-made goods. But what we're trying to do, number one, is limit how much we import. And even what we import now, we're trying to make sure that it is our designs, our brand.
Sure.
So we work with factories that will produce just for us in Thailand and places like that. But ultimately, the vision is for it to be an entirely African brand. So sourced locally, even the fabric.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we're sourcing most of our fabric from Asia. That's becoming more expensive. Prices are going up, but also the government has increased taxes on imported fabric. So both ways you're being hit. So now we're trying to look at places like Egypt, Mauritius, where because of trade rules, you can bring them in duty-free. So that the newer thinking is we try and do more closer to home.
Fantastic. So you're not only, making these dresses in terms of, stitching them together, but you're also manufacturing. So Wandia, how many people are you employing today? And what percentage are women?
Okay, 105, I think, at the last count. And I'd say 71% are women.
Fantastic.
And a lot are young as well. I mean, I'm by far the oldest in the company.
Youth is relative.
No. I'd say at least 70% of our staff are under 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And what would you say is the average level of education of your staff?
Definitely high school and some training beyond that. University graduates would be a smaller number.
Oh, yes.
Maybe 15% would be graduates. And that's, as we grow, we're able to create new positions where we can now afford to pay slightly better. I mean, we're still struggling to attract the talent. We want people come not because of the pay, but because they believe in what we're trying to do. And in fact, some of the most recent hires we've had, people have left places that they were earning more, and come because they just want to work with us. So
yeah, fantastic.
We hope that won't stay too long. We hope that as we grow, we can keep offering better,
of course,
better packages and
yeah. So you moved from a graduate of economics and then did your MBA and then came into fashion. And so some of the lessons that you've learned in terms of coming from corporate entity into doing business, what can you say have been the key challenges that you have faced?
Specifically from moving from one to the other, is that what you mean?
Yeah, in terms of transitioning from being, in a corporate setting with a different background and then...
Definitely, not getting a regular paycheck or not as big a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of adjustment that comes with that. And if you're used to working in a place where you anticipate a consistent amount of pay and package and benefits and things like that. So I went from an extreme because of having been an expat with, an international organization where you're so taken care of, to the point where even if something goes wrong in your house, you just call the office and they handle it, to now having to do everything yourself. So it's not just at work, but at home and, a big change there. But I think mentally, what I realized is, and in corporates, and maybe not all corporates, but definitely where I've worked, people assume that there's just resources. You know what I mean? Like no matter how much time you spend on the phone, how much paper you photocopy with, it's all this stuff. And when it's your own company, it's like, hang on a sec, did that have to be color? Like why? Like why?
Black and white.
Do you have to print that? Can't
Yeah.
it be a paperless? And it's because you really feel like it's your own money in a way, when it's your business and those bills rely on you to pay. So it's a very different, you become a lot more frugal and you expect others, but then I realize for everybody else, it's still just a job for them. You know what I mean? Like for them, they're employed. And so, the company will pay. And I'm like, the company doesn't earn anything other than what you sell, and we need to be efficient and we need to keep our costs down so that we can offer better prices, so that we can sell more, so we can have more money, and it's this whole sort of mindset. And then I realized how much I was wasteful,
in the past.
In the past. And if I could bring back some of that now and use it in Vivo, that would be great. But I think the challenges of starting anything from scratch are hard, but when it's your business and there's no head office or no big sister somewhere that can step in and say, you know what, we'll give you some runway. We'll keep paying your sort of base expenses for 6 to 12 months while you pick up. It's like, no, you have to fund it yourself from day one. The stress that comes with. So for me, I never lost sleep previously because I was worried about what money would be needed to pay someone else's salary.
Yeah, but
whereas
now it's real. Yeah.
I mean, that 100 people figure becomes, it sounds great on one level, but it's also like, whoa, those are 100 people who, will not pay their rent or school fees next month if you don't pay their salaries, So the pressure and the responsibility that comes with, I think it's a privilege, to be honest, on one level, but it's a huge responsibility on the other.
Yes.
So I sleep less than I...
Yeah, don't worry, sleep is overrated. It's okay. And like just looking at this growth process, you've undertaken a lot of, of course, on-the-job learning because you've had to learn on the steep learning curve, but also you've had some good, community, some support system surrounding you. So I was pleased to learn that you recently, were part of the Stanford Seed program. Just talk about what that did for you and what that experience gave you as an entrepreneur.
So Stanford, I'm not sure how much people are familiar with the program they run, but about 7 years ago, Stanford was granted a large amount of money by a couple that wants to impact poverty. And the way they want to do that is they're hoping to grow businesses in countries where there's a lot of poverty because they believe business will help to, obviously create more jobs, hire more people, and impact that way, as opposed to just donating money to an NGO or whatever, which is another way to also address it. I think all of these things are needed. When they first came to Africa, they went to West Africa. About 3 years ago, they started to offer the same program in Kenya. So I was part of that first cohort, which is an East African course. And it was amazing. I mean, for me personally, I had spent almost 12 years of my life working in development and, with the hope that the work that you do will have a greater impact especially towards people whose lives may not be as fortunate and are struggling. And so when I started with Vivo, I was like, okay, well, this is now just a business that's trying to help create money for me and a few people and hopefully create some jobs and offer something cool to the market. But I didn't feel it was doing anything to really impact beyond that. And I think what Stanford did in day one, there was a professor who had flown in from the Stanford Business School, and he spoke to us about vision and mission and purpose, and I literally had goosebumps because suddenly I could connect the dots, and I could see how if we take Vivo to a greater level, we can impact so much more than I had ever imagined possible. And that shifted my ambition. It shifted what I hope for the business, what I think it can do, in a much bigger scale that isn't just about money, and it's not just, it's important to grow a profitable business, but the impact that it can have. So from day one, I was like, whoa, okay, this course has already worked for me. I don't even need to come anymore. But then it just continued.
Yes.
And so, like many programs, it takes you through business models, but the entire time you're applying it to your business. And you're working with amazing other entrepreneurs who are in, somewhat similar stages of growth and sharing and, sort of advising each other, critiquing each other. They put together tiny groups, like peer coaching groups. And my group is a group of 5, and we still meet. Programs like that, and it's not the only one, there are a number of them. They do more than just help you understand the business angle. It's also about the networking, the support that you give each other, and the exposure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And just going back into the business and operations and how you run them, just wondering how you get all these nice locations. Retail business is very, location driven.
You pay a lot of money. That's why.
Yeah, I was just wondering because, like being in Yaya, being at the hub, being in Junction, being in, very strategic locations. What has that done for you in terms of, one, what impact has it had on your OPEX, but also what impact has it had on your sales?
I think there are lots of things that will influence the journey of a business. And I always, I think how much of it is luck. And to be honest, the fact that we opened our very first store at the Junction and we got the location we did on the ground floor, opposite Woolworths and, near Mr. Price and near the Planet Yogurt, that when it first opened was like the most exciting thing, in the food space in the mall. That made all the difference.
Oh, yes.
So it's not even just which mall, it's where within the mall. So if you had been 2 floors up, you might not have, it might not have been the same, the same experience. So we were very, very lucky. That location did well, and we used the retained earnings from that to open subsequent stores. Had we started in a store that took a lot longer to pick up, I don't know that we'd have had, we'd be telling the same story right now. So location matters. We opted for a very small one, which meant that, the rent outlay wasn't as bad, but it also meant that you cannot create the same kind of experience. So it's a gamble, right? And now, after 6 years, and when the lease was about to come up, a number of people were moving around. We then opted to take the space next door and expand it. Yes. But by that point, we had spent 6 years. We had proven that there was enough of a demand to warrant. So, you do these calculations and you're like, okay, even at our current sales, we can manage the new rent. The risk is much less. We would never have been able to take that bigger space from the get-go. Yeah, which is why it's difficult sometimes when you're looking at some of these international brands that are coming in. Because they have the money. They can take massive spaces and their rent will be covered, even if they don't make profit for the first couple of years, because they're thinking long-term and they've got the runway. When you're starting out and you're bootstrapping it, every shilling counts. Indeed. And so you really have to look at those calculations quite carefully. We've made some, I wouldn't say bad decisions, but decisions that didn't work as well. And we've ended up now, closing a couple of stores and reopening in what we think will be better locations. Although some of these things are never quite as obvious as you would think, So, for a brand like Vivo, Actually, we do better in middle-class neighborhoods than we do in high-end neighborhoods.
Yeah. Wandia, you've set up an online store, and just talk a little about that and what was the motivation for the online shopping? Are you seeing a lot of uptake for that, and has it enabled you ramp up your sales?
So, when we first started the business, actually the plan was to do it only online. We were going to just set up a website and put posters up and advertise on Facebook, and, somehow people would buy stuff, and then we realized very quickly that a lot of the product people wanted to try on. And so, we then completely moved to a storefront type strategy. But we had the website, so we're like, well, we're online, and if somebody actually called and said, will you deliver? We would. But we expected to operate very much like what we had seen in other countries. Like you pay upfront, you wait for it to be delivered, you pay for delivery. I mean, that's what, it's what you do, right? And then about a year and a half ago, I applied to join a network of entrepreneurs called Endeavor. And as part of that application process, I had to be interviewed. In fact, I was interviewed by 26 people by the time I'd gone through the whole process. And almost every conversation would come to this question, like, what are you doing online? And I would tell them, yes, we have an online, yeah. And they're like, okay, but how much of your sales? And I think at that point we were probably doing maybe 2 or 3% of our sales. And they're like, that's not enough. You're not being aggressive enough. You're not thinking about this strategically enough. You're not being adaptive and flexible. This market, you can't operate like you're in the US. So they challenged almost everything we were saying. And so we stepped back and we're like, okay, how can we try and do this differently? Yeah. And so we started to be a lot more flexible. So now we don't insist that you pay up front. We're like, no. Let us just bring it to you. And you can try it. In fact, we'll bring you 2 or 3, options and see which one you like better. We'll bring every single payment option to you. So we'll carry, POSs and PDQs. You can pay with your credit card from your work. You can send us M-Pesa, whatever it is. We now offer free delivery in Nairobi. So I think the strategy now is just get people to try it. Try it, see if you like it, learn that you can trust us, that you will get what we say we're sending to you. So occasionally we will see our products advertised on other people's websites.
Yes.
And I'm always like, what? Like, okay, so they've definitely stolen the picture, but what else? You know what I mean? Is it our product that someone internally is siphoning off and selling? Is it? Are they copying our designs? What's going on here? And then we'll order to test it.
Yes.
We'll just call them up, pretend we're a client, order it, and then a completely different dress comes. And I'm like, seriously? Is this? No wonder no one trusts, e-commerce.
Online, yeah,
well,
exactly.
I mean, I think it's changing the likes of Jumia for sure. But there are a lot of small, little online stores that are not selling what they claim to be selling. And so I understand why there needs to be more invested in trying to build that trust. And since we started doing that, we've definitely seen, an uptake. I think the sales have more than doubled online. They're not where we wanted to be, but we're working hard. And, I think partly it's also internal, like because we've been 7 years focused on
brick and mortar,
selling, that even internally, we treat online like it's this
side thing.
Yeah. Not even, like almost like the second-class citizen within the company. So even the stores, there's a mentality of, online is there to compete against us. And so we're having to really try and work to shift culture and change the mindset within our own teams to recognize that this is still Vivo. We're still serving clients, and what we want to work towards is being able to meet a client wherever the client is. And so one day you might order online, the next day you might buy it in the store and say, you know what, I don't want to carry it, I'm going for dinner, deliver it to my house tomorrow, or just be completely flexible around whatever works for the client. Is where we're trying to go.
Great. But how about your expansion out of Nairobi? How was that? I know you have a store in Nakuru, you're looking to grow even further. How was that? And how did the market outside of Nairobi receive that?
So it's still quite new. We've had the Mombasa store for almost 6 years now. And Nakuru, Eldoret. Nakuru we opened late last year. Eldoret earlier this year, and now Kiambu. I think it's a learning curve for us. So we're trying to really understand, how is that client different? So you make certain assumptions, it's Kenya, you just send the same product and you expect, and now, now that the team is growing and we've been able to hire more people, we now have a data analyst, we've got a new head of supply chain who's here. So we're really looking at trying to understand, okay, what actually is moving, what styles, what sizes, what colors, what are they saying when they're coming in? Do we need more sweaters than dresses, or is it this? So you really have to. We didn't do that homework first, so we're having to do it now, almost retroactively. So as sales are happening, then we're watching very closely and trying to understand it better. So it's a different way of doing market research, and it may, it's a different cost to the business. But so far the stores are still managing to cover their running costs, so we're not losing money anywhere, but we think we can do much better.
Indeed.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, you have other shareholders, and these are people who, of course, have walked the journey with you. And, it's not common for an entrepreneur in Kenya to open up their shareholding to others. So who are these others, and where did you meet them, and why them, and not me, for instance?
Okay. So for the first 6 years, it was me and my co-founder, my brother, and my ex-husband. And that was it. And literally the money was put in year one, and we didn't put in anything else. And just tried to grow the business organically, bootstrapping it, paying as little as possible for our shop fit outs, which now, you're like, oh my God, we can do a better job. But, we just wanted to roll out as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And then realized when the ambition got a bit bigger, so after the Stanford goosebump experience, we're like, okay, now we're going to have to find some money. And started to talk to people, and I know nothing about PE, venture capital. It's till today, I know very little. I'm learning all the time. So we had a couple of people talk to us, very small funds, but who were willing and were sort of like, yeah, maybe, about $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 type amounts. But they wanted a huge amount of equity. And at the size of the business then, and even now, if you approach it with a very straightforward, we're just going to look at your EBITDA, give you a multiple, and give you a valuation, then you will give away a lot for a relatively small amount of money. So at that stage, I was like, these are strangers. If we're going to sell equity now, I don't know that I want to do it with a group of people who may have quite a different sort of timeline and an approach to the business, and maybe even in terms of the expectations of how organized we must be. And I'd heard all these stories. Friends of mine who had gotten PE funding, and they're like, "What? Now you're going to start working for them? You're no longer working for yourself. You're now." So at that point, we thought, why don't we open it up to a smaller group of people we know? And so a number of my friends, some of which are my closest friends, got together, put money together and invested, and some of them did it individually. And so now it's very hard for me to go and complain about the business, and on my bad days, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't think we're going to make it. I can't tell any of them because they're like, but we put our money in your company. What do you mean?
Hold it in.
But it's great. So they're serious about it. They didn't do it as a favor. They expect a return. But at the same time, they're relatively understanding and supportive, and they're people who who buy the product and understand it, who are in this community, and so hear, people saying things, visit the stores now and then. So it's like they're investors, but they're ambassadors, and some of them are also very experienced in finance. And so I think now that we're thinking about looking more seriously at external capital raising, I think they will be great assets, to be on this side of the table.
Indeed. And I always say, I mean, if you're able to harness local capital, that speaks a lot to the investor who's coming in subsequent. I mean, that you can convince your own people to put in money. It's usually easy, people think, but it's not that easy, especially when you have to face them every day, and maybe the business is not doing too well. So it's important that, you have people who, one, understand your investment horizon, your vision, your mission, and are aligned. Because, you could have local investors, but also at some point they start asking you for their money back. So I think the mindset and the maturity level and the incentives need to align. And so maybe subsequently, as you think of capital, then, it'll be, okay, do they want to exit and make a return at this point, or do they still want to maybe bring in more capital to the business and continue? So those are some of the crossroads I think you'll have to face for your next step of growth. Have you thought about that? Being further diluted or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inevitable.
Sure.
It's just a question of when and with who. Who will you look to? And I've listened even to your podcast that you've done with some of the people who sat at this chair.
Yes.
And you hear that all the time. It's like, be very clear about who you're getting married to.
Oh, yes.
And actually at the Stanford event, the summit we had in September, one of the owners of Auto Express was there, and he was asked a question because they got funding from actors. I don't know how long ago, and he said, when you're getting married, to these investors, the conversation you should be having then is, how are we going to get divorced? Because it's a marriage that will end.
It'll end.
Like, that going in, as opposed to many other marriages where you hope it's going to last forever. This one will end, and you actually have some idea of when.
Oh, yes.
And what you need to talk about is how. Are we aligned on the timing of that end? Are we, the expectations of how we're going to say goodbye?
Oh, yes.
What we're going to walk away with? All those things. That is as important to the conversation as how much money are you putting in and what are you going to get from it?
Now let's talk about accountability. You have a board, Wandia. This is something that's unique. And of course, they expect answers. They hold you, accountable for the decisions you make and to implement their strategy. So who's on your board and how has that been for you? Because it's also one thing to be a local entrepreneur, but it's also something else to have not only external investors who are friends and family, but also having a board on top of that. So how has that been?
So again, it's one of those things, for some reason, quite early on, we decided we wanted a board. We didn't quite know what that meant. We were able to get somebody who's a very experienced company secretary to take us on at an SME rate. And so she brought a lot of structure. And so she spent half her time telling us, no. In a board, you don't talk about that. You talk about this. Or this is this decision must be taken here. So she sort of mentored us in, through that process of understanding.
Sure.
But at that point, it was really just me, my co-founder, and my brother. And so the conversation was a reporting one. It was just me saying, okay, here's what we did this quarter. And they'd say, oh, nice. And then go away and come back another quarter and say,
quarter.
Next quarter, what have you done? And again, through the Stanford Seed Program, because it's one of the things that they really encourage. And they didn't just encourage a board, but they encouraged you to have some independent board members, board directors. We then brought on board two independent directors, one who has a lot of experience in the retail space, 30 plus stores across the country, had, 30-year-old company.
Good.
And so that has been really helpful. So actually, when you asked the question earlier, how do you get those spaces? I was like, you have a board member who has contacts in all those spaces, because now he really helps. I mean, he's on first name basis with most of the landlords of these malls and whatever. So he not only helps us get space, but he helps us try and negotiate for a better price.
Great.
Which is great. And then the other guy, who comes from a more of an IT, technology, and finance background, because we realized that we weren't investing enough in the right sort of systems and technology to really grow. And we wanted someone on our side that could help us navigate that space. Since then, one of them has invested in the company, so he's no longer independent. But I feel that was a vote of confidence.
Yes.
Having now understood in depth what our
business,
what it was like, and still felt he wanted to invest. And has now become the second largest shareholder in the company. And then the other one is still independent. So we're still looking and thinking about who else. It's not easy. I mean, you want to think about
what value,
what value they'll bring, what skill set. But I still feel like I want to kind of know who they are. Like I don't know that I want a complete stranger to come. So maybe even if it's an introduction from someone I trust really well, but still someone that you kind of get a sense of who they are as people, as opposed to just what their CV says, because their CV can be great.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and that's what my company secretary always says, is Wandia, you have to be so much more professional if by the time you're now bringing in a lot of very professional board members.
Yes.
So meeting deadlines, when are board papers
due
to be out before you have a meeting. You can't do this like 2 days before the meeting. Oh, sorry, I've been busy. Here's the latest set of statements. And also just the kind of conversation. So right now we're a very operational board still. I can sit there and spend half an hour just, talking about a challenge I have at a very operational level. And the board that I have understands that.
Okay.
But if I was to bring in a much more corporate type director, it would be like, whoa,
you need to have subcommittees.
So I think you need to know who you're bringing in at what stage, and are you ready for them, and are they the right fit for you?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Wandia. You have been very inspirational. I think everybody in the audience has enjoyed your insights, your learning, really your story. And from us at IDEV and Meta and our partners, the AVCA, we would just want to say thank you so much. And we really enjoyed, having you with us. I have a small token of appreciation.
Oh, wow.
It's a notebook, which is Vivo colors, as you can see. Anyway, thank you so much. May this notebook be, a channel for you to jot down your big dreams, and may it come to fruition. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming. I know today the traffic was crazy.
Yeah.
So the fact that you made it, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. If you want to stay and interact, Wandia is still here. Thank you. This podcast series is hosted by IDEV, Meta, and IAVCA, recorded live from Nairobi.